Jason, what's going on?
I'm just enjoying some of my fine coffee in my new vessel for drinking coffee, my Vinyl Ventures mug. And you can too. You know, we have a link to our merch with every show that we post. And that's where you can get a mug just like this, or a Wheels approved sticker just like that.
Vinyl Gang, we're back at you. And boy, do we have a good show coming at you. It's divisive bands.
And artists.
It's
a bit of a departure. We aren't going to be talking about specific albums. We're going to be talking about bands, genres of music, you know, kind of a more deep dive discussion than we have in most shows.
Yeah, and this is more of a band or a show about bands and artists that people love or people hate.
Or people love to hate.
There's some of that.
It's interesting when you dive into this and you start looking for answers for why certain bands are divisive. There's such a broad spectrum of reasons for it.
There really is. And I mean, some of it, well, we'll get into it, but some of it is very age related.
Well, some of it's very age related, but I think the biggest thing that I saw that it boils down to is that people are so passionate about these artists and bands and types of music that, people fight that fight and keep fighting it. Most people I know that either hate a band or love a certain band have been that way as long as I've known them.
Well, and that's music in general.
Yeah.
People are passionate about music, and they should be.
Absolutely. I'm passionate about this fine coffee in my Vinyl Ventures mug.
Nice.
I'm pushing it. I'm pushing it like Keith normally
Keep pushing.
would. I will. So are there any bands that you have just absolutely been four square against since as long as you can remember?
Yeah. And
we'll probably talk about a couple.
And I think for me, because the songwriting has such a big part of why I love music. Mm-hmm. And for me, there's certain voices that just my ears don't get.
Right.
It's not that I'm never going to say I hate a band.
No.
It's just that I don't get it.
Yeah. I mean, it's all perception.
Yeah.
And it's all very subjective.
Yes.
But people take that subjectivity and kind of place it out there.
Yeah.
To where it's less subjective, and
they get very passionate about it.
Yes. Yeah.
Especially on message boards like Reddit.
Oh, absolutely.
My. It's a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Don't go there.
It is. But where we want you to go is our YouTube channel. We want you to communicate with us. We want you to look at all of those fine video morsels that our friends Keith and Jacob have helped us put up there over the last, this is the 6th season that we've done this.
Nice.
And probably the 40th or 45th episode that we've done on video.
Yeah, with our studio.
Yeah. So when people go there, John, what do we want them to do after they check it out?
I'm going to throw you a little dad joke on one thing we want you to do.
Okay.
If it's your vibe, subscribe.
I love it. Now we're going to have to get new stickers made.
Yeah.
So what is your first example that you'd like to speak about?
First example.
I'll take the Vinyl Ventures.
I think this is a good one to kick it off. You can remove that.
I'll take the Vinyl Ventures flat. I think we're going to get some stickers made of this too. So just the zoomed in logo. Why don't you just throw that anywhere?
I forgot to take my
condoms
jackets off. So first on the list, the Grateful Dead.
Yes.
And it's funny. I found this blog, and the title of the blog is...
Oh, God.
61 reasons to hate the Grateful Dead. And then they go through and they list all the different reasons.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you think about the end of the Grateful Dead,
Yeah.
at least the original Grateful Dead, that was 95 when Jerry died.
Yeah.
That's a long time ago. That's basically pre-internet,
Yeah.
pre-social media, and they are a great example of a band that I can think of that was all word of mouth, right?
Yeah, it's not like they were a big radio play band.
No, and they weren't commercially, successful until that second to last album.
Yeah, which was weird.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you think about it, that was really the first album that they did in that MTV era, right?
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. But
So,
yeah.
so Touch of Grey off of that album just blew up because of that silly video.
They started in 65 and, really for probably the first 10 years of their career, they were very much a jam band.
Right.
And I mean, people love to hate jam bands too.
Yeah.
I mean, they're kind of their offspring, Fish, same thing.
Yeah.
People hate or love.
Yeah. And there's a lot of examples of jam bands like that.
Dave Matthews gets the same way. I mean, there are people who hate Dave Matthews and there are people who love Dave Matthews. And I mean, I think a lot of the jam bands, the people who go to the concerts love the band.
Oh, yeah.
They want to see him more than once,
Yeah.
multiple times.
Dave Matthews, every time he tours, I think every one of his stops is at least 2 nights.
Yeah.
When you think about it, for a band, and they play sheds in the summer, so you're talking about a venue that can hold 25, 30,000 people.
Yeah.
And to sell that out 2 nights in a row,
And they sell out fast. It's not like it's a trickle in sell out. It sells out within hours.
Right. And the other crazy thing about it is there's a different set list each night.
Yeah.
At least for Dave Matthews.
Yeah, well, and the Dead did a similar thing. I mean, the set lists were a big deal with Dead shows.
Yeah. And, one of the things that a lot of people may not know about the Dead, if you're not a fan, is from the very beginning, they welcomed people recording their shows. And that's why there's so many shows out there available, because they just had this attitude that record the shows, share them.
Yeah, they had a whole little pin set up for people to set up their recording devices. And some of those are really, really good. I mean, as far as live shows go, their live shows have been documented better than any other band.
Yeah. And that may be one thing that endeared people to them, is their loosey-goosey attitude on that. Now, I'm sure Warner Brothers Records didn't necessarily love the fact that the band, promoted that, but that was an ethos of the band from the beginning, and that was a part of Grateful Dead.
Yeah.
For sure.
And it's funny, even the band knew that people weren't, Jerry Garcia explained why people hate the Grateful Dead. That seems pretty cut and dry, he said. I mean, for the band to even know, hey, there's some people who really hate us, and there's some people who love us.
Yeah.
We're okay with it.
Yeah. And, they took that information all the way to the bank.
Yes, they did. It did not hurt them one bit.
No. And I think it's an interesting turn for a band, like the MTV example I gave earlier. That's just such an interesting turn. Can you imagine had Jerry not passed away when he did, how much of an opportunity the Grateful Dead would have had in the years to come with social media and getting information out there and electronically sharing music files and stuff. It would have really been an interesting thing if that band survived through the 90s.
And even now when their albums pop up, I mean, they're usually multiple albums because they're live shows, a complete venue live show. I mean, they're not cheap.
No.
I mean, you get like a Dick's Picks from, somewhere in New York.
Yeah.
And it's going to be $70, $80
Yeah.
or more.
Yeah. And Grateful Dead also, it's Warner that's their label. Every record store day, it seems like they package a new show and put it out.
Because there's thousands of them.
Yeah. The thing about the Dead is that their in-studio catalog isn't necessarily that expansive.
No.
But their live show catalog is unmatched probably by any other band. I mean, not only are there more and more official releases, but there are more and more, unofficial and bootleg releases popping up all the time.
Yeah, and when I think a lot of the hatred, and they even had some of their diehard fans on Shakedown Street give them some hate because that was called the disco album.
That is a great example of a divisive album from a divisive band. Because it's already a divisive band, but that was Shakedown Street 77 or 78? 79 maybe.
It may have even been earlier than that.
It was in that disco era.
Yeah.
But I love that song.
I do too. I like the album.
Yeah, the whole album is really good.
But I'm not a diehard Dead fan. I like the Dead. I had a chance to see him in Indy.
Oh, did you?
On that final,
when they stormed the fence?
I think we went the night before they stormed the fence.
Okay. Yeah.
They were either doing maybe even 3 nights, 2 or 3 nights.
Yeah. But that's a great first example, man.
Yeah.
I mean, there is probably no better example of a band like we're talking about other than the one that I'm getting ready to show. And we've talked about this band many times.
You're next. Who is it?
Oh, see, we didn't take the records out of the condoms. This is my Steely Dan greatest hits. And, I talk about Steely Dan a lot because I've loved them since college. I don't know why. Well, I do know why it really stuck in college, because there were some chemicals and experiences that converged and really hit that home. But Steely Dan is maybe as divisive as Grateful Dead. They certainly don't have the catalog of bootleg and live shows, and they certainly probably don't even have the catalog of studio records. But I was thinking about this yesterday and kind of talking with my wife about it. I think that Steely Dan is loved and hated for one big reason. Their music is so derivative of jazz and has so many really intricate musical devices going on within it that I think it's both a genius mixture of pop and jazz and fusion and funk, and it's just enough of the jazz side of things to turn people off. I also think that lyrically, their music is so sarcastic and so smart-ass that it's not what it seems like it is on the surface. You know what I mean?
I recently listened to a Steely Dan cover show.
Oh, did you?
On a podcast called Coverville that I've listened to for years. Uh-huh. And I'm like, maybe this will get me to like Steely Dan more. Not so much.
Well, it's, the musical perfectionism and technical virtuosity is one thing that people list as both something that people love and hate about Steely Dan. As a musician, as a drummer, and I mess around on other instruments too, that's what I love about it. I love the fact that they had the finest musicians in the world, a lot of them jazz musicians, a lot of them studio jazz musicians that, that did pop music and rock music and probably even played in country recordings at the time too. But they were the type of band that when they were recording a song, they'd have like 5 guitarists lined up to come in and record the solo. And so each of these guys would come in, different days or the same day or whatever, and record the solo, and it would be like a competition between these dudes. They may not have like gone head to head or even known who the other musicians were, but that's kind of the way that Steely Dan did it. And it wasn't necessarily by perfectionism. It was the feel that they got from them. And, you know, that's also why it took them so long to record all of their albums, because they took that approach. And they had that latitude from the record company to be able to be a little more perfectionist than maybe a lot of bands at the time.
Well, and I think at the time, record companies gave bands a lot more latitude, as we've talked 100 times.
Oh,
you know, they had many albums to succeed or fail.
Right. And today it's like one chance and
it's gone.
Yeah. There's so many bands knocking at that door today.
Yeah.
You know, and the gatekeepers are down.
Yeah.
Anybody can put something out there and see what happens. And I think that that's both a good thing and a bad thing. Steely Dan's complex and unique sound is another divisive thing. And, you know, their kind of blend of jazz, rock, and pop, it creates a unique sound that appeals to a broad audience, but it's not necessarily discernible that it isn't jazz. You know what I mean? I mean, you hear the influences and kind of the stew that they've created, but it's not necessarily discernible as pop music. You know, they don't sound like any band that you're ever going to hear on FM radio.
No.
Now, there's some reasons that I've kind of dug into why people hate Steely Dan. There's a perceived smugness and an overproduction. See, my feeling is there is a way to very intricately and sonically produce something where I don't necessarily feel like it's over the top, but some people hear that sonic perfection. Some people hear all those little details and it's just not appealing to them. Another thing is just the complexity of the music and whether or not that's an accessible thing for people. And again, if you're not a musician, that may be an enormous turnoff.
Yeah.
Just hearing different time signatures or hearing key changes in places that
don't normally happen.
That don't exist in pop music. Then there's a genre thing that I think turns people off, just because when you hear them, you may be listening to them on an AM, you know, back in the day on an AM station, and you may be like unable to say, this is something that belongs here or here. You know what I mean? It's people's ears tell them a lot. They don't have to have a necessary reason for it. But sometimes when you hear something and it's just like immediately, I like this, I don't like this.
Yeah.
And I think if you give your average listener a little taste of Steely Dan that maybe they hadn't heard before, I think it's probably going to be a 50-50 kind of thing.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's they're not. I don't even know where they're a rock band, but they're not. You're not going to hear hard rock from Steely Dan.
No, although I'd love to.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear. Well, I mean, Walter Becker has passed away, but I would have loved to have heard them do a heavy metal album.
Yeah.
But you know, their polarizing nature for a lot of people stems from the blend of technical perfection, complex musical structures, and witty lyrics that a lot of people
don't get.
There's a lot of layers to what, you know, they're singing about. If you want to get into Steely Dan, look at this picture of these guys here too. If you want to get into Steely Dan, I would definitely recommend the Greatest Hits.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's a nice cross section. And like I said, they don't have a lot of studio releases, but I love them. I've loved them for 30 years. Whatever that means.
I won't hold it against you.
I look forward to your comments about Steely Dan. And what is your next example?
The next example, Your Honor, is a little band from Ireland, U2.
Me too?
U2.
Me as well?
Yeah. U2 started in 76, and I really think early U2, there was no love and hate. But it was probably pop that introduced it.
I would say even before pop, I'd say Zooropa.
Zooropa, yeah. Zooropa is probably the one. I mean, I think a lot of U2 fans at that point were like, okay, this is different, but then pop just sent it over the edge.
It kind of, that's where it went over the edge for me, and I was like an outside U2. I mean, U2, through their whole career, has been one of those bands where I'll hear the new song and go, oh, I don't like that. And then I'll hear the next album or whatever and be like, oh, wow, I really like it. They've been up and down for me, for sure. But pop, when that happened, I mean, a
lot of people just shut the door.
Well, they became like a dance band.
Yeah. And
almost like an EDM band.
Yeah, and they were a band that was trying to change with the times, and the diehard fans, it just didn't work.
Well, and we're still talking about them.
Yeah.
So they were okay.
Yeah. They've since, kind of gone back to their original sound. But I think for modern day fans, the nail in the coffin was Songs of Innocence.
Oh, the one that...
the free Apple song.
The one that just showed up on people's iPhones.
It's like a virus. It really is. Because you get a new phone and you don't have any music yet.
Yeah.
Except that.
I hadn't really thought about that. But yeah, I remember. And that was all over the news for like a month.
Yeah, I mean, it made them bundles and certainly got their name out there more. But that was really, for a lot of people, it's like, God, like modern music fans are like, people under 30 are like, that one event turned them into hating U2.
Yeah. I mean, imagine with our last example, if you went to bed tonight and woke up and you had a Steely Dan album on your device that you didn't put there.
Yeah. And I mean, I think a lot of U2's hatred comes from Bono because he's such an outspoken, he's almost like and he's very progressive in his thoughts and what he wants to do.
Yeah.
And that has turned a lot of people off.
It certainly has. I mean, they started as a political band.
Yeah, they've always been political.
They became a political band because of what was going on in their homeland when they were kids. And I understand that. And it's so funny because it seemed like he has been pushing against that tide for so long. And walking that tightrope between pop star and political activist. And, people, especially now, are a lot more outspoken than they've ever been politically and
about anything.
About everything.
Well, yeah. And they, when they started, it was the height of the punk era. So they were, and a lot of those bands were very political and weren't afraid to say anything about it. So they grew up with that kind of that ethos.
I personally think that whether or not you agree with a pop star taking his platform to further whatever they want to speak about, if you go down the list, and there's plenty of people that don't like Bono, but he has done so many good things for so many people and given his voice to so many causes that otherwise wouldn't have had any support.
Well, yeah, and whatever he lends his voice to or his statement to, they bring in money.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a powerful thing.
Why do you think other than the political stuff, why do you think that they're such a divisive band?
I think a lot of it is really Bono
Mm-hmm.
and how popular they became.
Yeah.
I mean, you can really break it down to Bono, that Free Apple album. That Free Apple album has really not, it's probably done as much harm as good for the band.
Yeah. I was going to say their popularity, I think, started working against them, ironically, with the pop album.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I mean, there was a point where you could not get away from U2.
No, they were everywhere.
And what was that tour called? Was it called Pop Mart? I think that tour was called Pop Mart, and it was just absolutely enormous. The stage was enormous. But you know, I mean, U2 has weathered all of those storms. And now you're talking about, these guys are probably in their mid to late 60s now, because they were so much younger than a lot of the contemporaries that they were coming up with. You know, it's so interesting that they just keep finding that foothold, right?
Yeah, and U2 is one of those bands. I mean, I saw them 3 times in the early 80s, and you know, that was a great time to see them.
Oh yeah.
And after really Joshua Tree, I kind of just checked out on them.
Yeah.
And maybe it was burnout, maybe it was just the early stuff I still really love to hear. Like if I'm listening to like XM or something and the early stuff comes on, I'm cool with it. But the later stuff, a lot of times I'm like, I got to find something else.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we're talking about the zenith of their popularity being pop, which I think was like 95, something like that. But Joshua Tree probably was about as commercially, at least radio and MTV wise, was probably the zenith of their career, I would think.
Yeah, in 87.
Yeah. So, you know, it's been what, like 45 years now?
Yeah.
So, or no, 87 is only like 37 or 38 years.
Nobody said there'd be any match.
I know. That's why we do what we do.
And U2's funny that they say people don't hate us enough.
A lot of that attitude can circle back to the old adage that there's no such thing as bad publicity.
Exactly.
Right. And these guys, most of these bands that we're talking about today, started in an era where publicity was nothing like it is today.
No.
The internet and social media and digital music, that has completely changed the playing field for every one of these artists that we're talking about. That's a great example, man.
Yeah.
I like it.
U2, 170 million records worldwide.
Wow.
Can't go wrong with that. You're up.
There's a band from New York City called Kiss that is very polarizing and very popular with people and very unpopular with people. And I can just go back to the earliest days when I first saw Kiss. My cousin, who is probably 15 years older than me, when I was a very young kid, my cousin Billy had the fluorescent blacklight Kiss poster in his room. He had the Kiss dolls, like the foot tall original Kiss dolls that are worth a bunch of money nowadays. And, you know, at the time I was like 5 and 6 years old. And I just remember being simultaneously frightened and excited by the band. And this is probably before I'd even heard any of their music, just the visual. And so that's a good jumping off point with Kiss, the visual. I mean, the kabuki makeup, the individual characters, the fact that their actual images were obscured, and they played into that. They never went in public and had pictures taken of them. And any picture you saw in the press or in the newspaper, if they're, getting out of a limousine and walking into a club,
they've got the make.
No, they're like obscuring half of their face so that you can't see what their actual identity is. And in today's world, you can't imagine that happening, right? In today's world, with groups like TMZ and the 24-hour news cycle, I mean, there are photographers everywhere.
Well, there are cameras everywhere.
There are cameras everywhere, but there are photographers everywhere that celebrities are going to be. And can you imagine today a band trying to disguise their actual identities from the press? I mean, the best example I can think of a band that has tried to do that recently is Ghost. And the brains behind Ghost is a guy named Tobias Forge. And, for a couple albums, they were trying to keep his identity hidden from most of us. It's just impossible to do. But anyway, that was the first thing about Kiss that I think really, after they became popular, really, that mystery was always out there, right? That nobody knew who they were or what they looked like without the makeup. And that's something that you can put out there that just keeps people talking, even if you don't have an album that's on the charts, or even if you're not out there touring. So that's pretty ingenious. Also built into the love and the hatred of this band is just the sheer commercialism of everything that they've done since they became international superstars. I mean, there's nothing that I can think of that they haven't put their name on. They've got wine, they've got hard alcohol, they've got kids' toys, puzzles, Halloween masks and makeup kits, and on and on and on. And these guys were kind of trailblazers in that commercialization of a rock and pop band.
Yeah, they really were. And I think with the makeup, one other thing that happens is they become almost a cartoon.
Yeah, well, that's the way they approached it. I mean, they considered themselves superheroes. And each of these identities is a different superhero. And it's all kind of based in comic book type stuff. And that was another thing. In the 70s, Marvel did the original set of Kiss comic books, and they had this whole press thing set up where each of the guys in the band had a vial of their blood drawn, and they poured their blood into the ink for the comic book. It's a PR thing that just took off, and that people still talk about that.
Well, and there was wasn't there a show in the 70s, a TV made-for-TV movie that was almost comic booky like? Yeah,
it was Hanna-Barbera, I think, produced it, and it was Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a silly... I mean, I think originally they wanted to do a theatrical movie, but it ended up being a television movie. And I remember it being very young and seeing it for the first time and just seeing it, thinking it was the coolest thing in the world. But it is silly to look back on now. But, we're talking about Kiss, but we haven't even mentioned the music yet, which is a great example of why Kiss has become what they have become, because there's so much to dig into with these guys. And, we've probably been talking about them for 5 or 6 minutes and haven't even talked about the music. The music is another polarizing thing. A lot of people think that their music is immature and, too based in sex and innuendo. And a lot of other people, just think it's great. I mean, Kiss, to me, has never been one of those bands that I look to for philosophy, right?
No, anybody who is missing the mark.
I mean, there's not a lot of depth there.
No.
I mean, in many ways, the musical side of this band is a lot like AC/DC. I mean, they do what they do. They're 3.5 minute songs, 3 chords, a couple choruses, and we're out. One of the big things with Kiss is Ace Frehley and his guitar playing. If I can't say it for sure, but he may be the biggest influential rock guitarist from the 70s, because so many people refer to him as their inspiration for wanting to play guitar. And a lot of people also talk about his solos, how his solos are like little songs within the songs. So even though a lot of people might have turn their nose down at Kiss overall, as far as whatever the quality of the music or the songs is, people always point to Ace and the quality of the guitar work that he did on those classic records. Another thing that makes them kind of divisive is, after 1980 hit, the cracks really began to show between the members of the band. So the band has always kind of been driven by Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley. And Peter and Ace were kind of the wild cards of the group, kind of the party animals, the guys who maybe got a little mixed up in the drugs and the sex and stuff. And so the first one to leave the band was Peter. And it's odd to read about that, because even though, they've replaced these members, they're really not replaceable when you think about it. When you look at the way Kiss ended up, they had two guys playing Ace and Peter. Tommy Thayer was Ace, and Eric Singer, who was in the non-makeup era of Kiss, was Peter. And I think that's a very big reason why they're divisive too, because a lot of people thought after Ace and Peter left the band for the second time, after the big reunion, a lot of people took offense to the fact that Gene and Paul were placing other people in those positions with that makeup.
Yeah.
They kind of thought, hey, if you're going to have other individuals in the band, give them a different character to wear. But, Paul and Gene realized that the recognizable characters are the Catman and Space Ace.
I would think the unmasking probably separated a lot of fans also.
And because of the commercialization of the band, it's easy to understand, by the end of the 70s, what were true fans from the beginning were a little put off by how commercialized the band had become.
I think that happens with any band that's really popular. I mean, the people who were in on the band in the early stages are like, oh.
Yeah, they kind of feel...
Now everybody knows.
Yeah, not only that, but they kind of feel betrayed by the fact that the band is just so committed to being that commercial. But one thing that we haven't mentioned in any of these discussions so far is that pop music is called pop for a reason.
Yes.
Because it's popular. It's almost antithetical to be a fan of a band and not want them to become popular.
Right.
But all of these trappings and all of these things that seem to divide and break bands up seem to be because they've become popular, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost a contradiction.
It really is.
And it's really interesting to think about any band in that regard, because people are passionate about music. I mean, to me, music is one of the most important things in my life. I mean, anybody that knows me knows that. I've never taken that attitude that, oh, these guys are selling out or whatever. And we'll talk about some other bands that kind of get labeled as sellouts too. But I've never been one of those people that didn't want my band to be successful and popular, because I knew that meant that more people are able to enjoy it.
Right.
But like I said, as soon as you reach the zenith of popularity like these guys did in the, 1978, I mean, they put 4 solo albums out on the same day and shipped 1 million of each of them. That's a pretty cocky attitude to take for any band.
Yeah.
Right. And many of those records ended up in cutout bins at the time. I brought Psycho Circus. I was skeptical, but there are really some solid songs on this. It's not really a reunion record. I mean, Peter sings on a couple songs and I think plays on one or two. Ace sings on one, wrote one of the songs and plays on a couple. But a lot of the musicians on this are not Peter and Ace.
Yeah.
I mean, Paul and Gene, yes, but the other two are sporadically on the record. You know, they're one of the biggest examples of a very polarizing band for sure.
Yeah.
So, who's your next example?
The Eagles.
Or Eagles.
Yes. As the dude in Big Lebowski said, not the fucking Eagles. I hate the fucking Eagles. And there may be the epitome of a band that, as we've talked about a lot of these bands, when they became popular, they became really popular. I mean, this is still one of the best-selling records ever.
Yeah.
The Eagles' greatest hits. And I think a lot of people after really in the later years kind of turned off to the Eagles because they became very commercial.
Well, commercial, yeah. I mean, they were like an AM radio staple.
Yeah.
Man, speaking of the Eagles, my wife and I were coming back from dinner last night and listening to Sirius XM, and one of these nights came on. Man, what a great song. There is so much interesting stuff going on in their music. And Eagles, not the Eagles.
I'm going to keep saying the Eagles
I know.
because it seems weird.
Yeah. Sonically, they are very much like Steely Dan. Their music was recorded, in the 70s at a time where you had bands. Well, the Beatles weren't around anymore, but the Beatles had done what they did in the studio, which is on a level that no other band could have ever matched. But when I think of bands from that era and their music and just albums that are so pleasing to listen to, I think of these guys.
Yeah, and the Eagles, I remember one of my first Columbia House orders included The Long Run.
Oh, yeah.
I know it included The Long Run and Back in Black.
Oh, man.
And, that's when you first start driving. So those are ingrained in my my being.
Yeah. Eagles are also one of those bands that has had a lot of personnel changes over the years.
Yeah, I don't think there's any one person that in the Eagles that people say, "Ooh, that's the reason," or their look. It's just that they're kind of the epitome of a corporate band.
Whatever that
means. But I think that's what people say. Oh, they're so corporate.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, again, there's the whole argument that success works against you, right? I mean, you become very successful. You sell millions upon millions of albums. You're on the radio constantly. You may or may not be in the press for one reason or another. Your personal lives become, under a microscope. All of these things begin to work against you as a band.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the hate comes from the people who really like the Eagles.
Yeah.
Because the people who love the Eagles, I mean, it's the picket fence SUV driving people. You'll see mom going to the soccer game in a Nissan Armada blaring, The Long Run or Hotel California. It happens.
Yeah.
Some of the heat is that they just got away from their original sound. because their original sound was that kind of
Southern California,
Southern California sound,
like country rock,
very laid back, and then
Yeah.
they became more. I think with probably Hotel California, they became more of a
guitar band.
guitar band. Yeah,
I mean, you had Don Felder,
Joe Walsh,
and Joe Walsh, two of the best guitarists that have ever recorded music in that band. I mean, what I think of is Hotel California is a whole other thing. I mean, we could do an entire
Here we've even got it.
we could do an entire episode on this album. But you've got Don Felder and Joe Walsh in the band. And all the guys that have been in the Eagles are just fantastic musicians.
Yeah.
I mean, we should point out, for anybody that doesn't know, is the Eagles started as Linda Ronstadt's backing band.
Right.
So much the same way that the band started as Dylan's backing band and then became the phenomenon that they are. Eagles were that way for Linda Ronstadt. And that's just crazy to think about.
It really is.
In today's world, if somebody were to say, okay, Katy Perry's band is putting an album out, do you think that they would expect them to be anything like
Right.
the Eagles became? I mean, they could be. How many albums have they sold? Probably 300 million or something.
Well, that greatest hits alone has probably sold as many as the rest of their catalog.
Yeah. I mean, it's a phenomenon for sure. But I feel like the quality of the music backs up all of the hype and all of the bad press.
And they've never been a band that I love, I'm not going to wave the flag. I love the song Hotel California.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if every song went away that they've done and I just had that song, I'd be happy. I love covers of it. I love everything about it. I don't know why. I just like the song.
Back to the Big Lebowski.
Yeah.
The mariachi version of Hotel California that's in that movie is just, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's
I'm going to get that soundtrack just because I love that cover version.
I have that soundtrack. I got it for RSD maybe 8 years ago. It's on what did they call it? White Russian colored vinyl.
That's perfect. Yeah. They're one of those bands. It's kind of like when we saw the Doobie Brothers. They may be doing a corporate event, but they're not mailing it in.
No. The longer a career gets, the easier it is to misinterpret, like, okay, they're known for this song or that song. But when you hear them played one after another at a show, it really drives home how important bands like that are, right?
It really does.
Yeah, that's an excellent example. I like it.
Eagles or the Eagles. So Jason's up next, and what's he going to throw at us?
Well, I'm going to throw not just a band, I'm going to throw a genre at you. And that genre is called hair metal, which I don't like. I like 80s hard rock.
You just don't like the name.
Well, it's not that I don't like the name. I don't like I think when you label an entire genre with something like that, hair metal or makeup metal or whatever you want to call it, I think it really casts aside the importance of those bands. I mean, you may not listen to it, you may not like it, but for almost an entire decade, bands like this were selling the most records, selling the most tickets, and all over MTV, all over the press. I guess my whole thing is, you can make fun of the image, and that's fine, but I really don't think that the image overshadows the quality of the work that all of these bands put forward in that time. And again, talking about the popularity, people wouldn't have spent their money on tickets and records if the music wasn't good.
No, I don't. I think you're turning into Donald Fagen. You're going to tell the producer to screw off. I mean, it's genres are like, for me, even putting bands in a new wave genre is hard because it encompasses so many other genres.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Here's another example.
yeah,
Motley Crue.
I think that, to me, that says hair metal.
Girls, girls, girls.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, the grunge and alternative stuff that happened toward the end of the 80s is what everybody refers back to as pushing the hair metal thing off the map. And to hear it from Janie Lane from Warrant, he passed away, I don't know, 7-8 years ago, unfortunately. He died at a time when this music hadn't really caught the resurgence. Now, all of these bands, you know, with the amount of festivals there are every summer, all of these bands have kind of resurged back into the, you know, consciousness of everybody. And, you know, it's nostalgia for a lot of people, but a lot of these bands do very well for themselves playing these shows.
Sure.
At the time that all of this music became the phenomenon that it did, I was like between like 10 and 15 years old. And, you know, that's a very impressionable time for a kid.
Yeah.
But my parents, most of my friends were years older than me. So that's why I was able to go to all of these shows at that time, because I didn't have a license. But my parents were forward thinking enough and kind enough to know that they could trust me and my friends, and they knew how much I loved this music and
yeah.
these shows. And, you know, I loved country bands at the time too, and got to see them. So because it was such an impressionable time in my life, and because I loved it so much, that I think that probably plays into why I don't like the term hair metal. But, you know, I think that in retrospect, the music is the star. But at the time, since everything was so kind of blown out of proportion, the hair was as high as it could be, the makeup, you know, look at Motley Crue here. I mean, they're on their motorcycles with their hair teased up, and, you know, they're outside of the topless bar or whatever. Here's a dancer right here, and they're all peeing on the wall on the back cover of this.
There's no denying the marketing in music, but I mean, without the look, if they were just guys in t-shirts and jeans with regular hair,
yeah,
would it have taken off? Nobody knows. Without the image, would the music have been as popular?
It's hard to tell, because
it's impossible to tell.
It is,
Yeah.
But the other wild card in the stew here is MTV. I mean, since MTV was a combination of visual image and radio, you know, think about early days of MTV. I mean, everybody was on there. You had, you'd have like a band like Devo and Duran Duran, and then there'd be a Def Leppard video.
Yeah, it was it was not a format.
No, there really was no format, because they were just trying to pump out as much content as they could.
And maybe that's, you know, I don't think we've ever talked about that about MTV. It didn't have a format, but it gave you everything.
Yeah, it gave you everything except black artists. If you think about
a long time, yeah.
For a long time, MTV kind of existed in this place where Michael Jackson was really the only black artist that you ever saw. But you're right, there really was no format. And as MTV went forward, I mean, Headbangers Ball became a big thing on Saturday nights, I think.
Yeah.
For a couple hours, it was just all heavy music or hair metal. Yeah, so there were a lot of parts to the equation when it came to this era of rock music.
Well, but I mean, fashion has been a part of rock and roll since the Beatles hit the shore in '63.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people say that this was just an evolution of glam, and everything that T-Rex and David Bowie and all of those bands did in the 70s. It was just kind of blown out of proportion, and it had that media of MTV to push it into everybody's lives.
Yeah.
Guns N' Roses seems to be one of the bands from this era that, even though they existed in the same time frame as bands like this, they seem to have escaped the 80s without being labeled
Hair metal.
a hair metal band.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because, they became so all-encompassing when Appetite, took over the world. And then they had however many singles from that. And then they had the GNR Lies album. And then there was a little lull between that and 91 when Use Your Illusions came out. I mean, honestly, what kind of band is their second full album does a double album with like a total of like 28 songs on it? But, Guns N' Roses is one of the bands that kind of seems to have escaped this decade without too much consideration as a hair metal band. So whatever that tells you, I mean...
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never really even thought of it that way.
We could talk all day about those bands in that interim between the late 80s and the beginning of alternative and grunge too. I mean, the lines weren't as distinct then, but it seems like 89, 90, it seems like they were being drawn. And then, when Nevermind became the phenomenon that it was, all of these guys seemed to be relegated to the, that was then.
The back burner. Yeah.
This is now. So that's kind of my little diatribe about why I don't like calling it hair metal. You can take it or leave it.
That's a good one.
Thanks.
All right. This is going to get a lot of love or hate from our watchers, but the good old Beatles. The Beatles, and they're a band that are hated by some people and loved by others. And I think the people who hate it are people under 30 or even under 40. I remember I was working with somebody from the UK who was in his 20s, and this is several years ago, but he could not stand the Beatles.
It's interesting. I mean, as soon as I hear somebody say that they hate the Beatles, I'm immediately skeptical of them.
Yeah,
because
wait a minute.
Well, I mean, and this is my personal feelings involved here, but I kind of feel like they are the one band that is a part of all of us somehow. That the Beatles, through whatever phenomenon or miracle, it seems like they are kind of in our DNA.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the hatred comes from who the members are.
Oh, yeah.
And what they're like. I know a lot of people are not terribly fond of John Lennon, the person.
Right.
Maybe not the greatest guy in the world.
No, but that also goes back to our discussions about being able to and basically having to separate the artist from the art.
I always separate. I mean, whatever they do in their personal life, hey, that's your life. Do whatever you want.
Yeah, but I mean, you think about it, back then how hard that was to do. And then now we're at a time where news about all of these famous musicians and bands and artists is being pushed into our faces constantly.
It's in a way now when you hear about a band doing something or an artist doing something, it's easy to scroll past it because there's so much. But in their day, when the Beatles were the Beatles, you couldn't scroll past it.
No, and if you watch the Get Back 9-hour documentary,
yeah,
there are many scenes of them in the studio, especially Paul McCartney, seemingly reading like the opinion newspapers, because newspapers in England are much different than they are here. There's opinion in our press, in our printed press here, and has been, but in England, it's more it's more like National Enquirer type. What would you call those?
Sensational news.
Yeah. But in that doc, he's reading like a lot of these things that they're writing and guessing and saying about the band, and they got into a fist fight and all of this stuff, and that was a real thing back then, 50 years ago. I mean, I can imagine how difficult that would be for a contemporary band, for sure.
Yeah, and when you start going through, the Beatles are a lot like the Grateful Dead. You start doing research and looking at the blogs. People have 101 reasons to hate the Beatles. And you don't know if they're doing it, they're being sensationalist, but maybe they really, because you start reading their points, it's like, oh, I can see that. But there's no denying they put out some incredible music. It doesn't appeal to everybody, but I think more than anybody else, this band, the music is as important as the people.
Oh yeah, maybe more. I think more so.
Yeah.
And they were kind of precursors to the whole Kiss thing. Like this band was basically the first one to market not just the music, but the personalities of the members. You know, everybody in the band got to sing a song. Everybody, not everybody, but, they all wrote music that was on albums and released. You hadn't seen that before. And Kiss just kind of took this Beatles model where everybody knew each of the members' names, and just took it to a new height. But the Beatles were definitely groundbreaking in that it wasn't just a lead singer, it was all of the guys in the band.
Yeah, and the Beatles you put somebody who hates the Beatles and loves the Beatles in a room, there's going to be a fist fight. It's really true, because people who love the Beatles are so passionate about the band, and they're not going to listen to anything negative. They hear one negative thing and they're...
Well, see, I'm not like that. I can definitely, I love the band and always have. As long as I can, as far back as I can remember, I loved the Beatles. And my mother loved the Beatles, and she let me listen to her records, which I scratched
Bing.
the hell out of, Mr. Russell. Bing. But I can separate my own love for something and, kind of objectively look at it, like the hair metal thing. I know that there are people who use that term because it's the first thing that pops to head and it makes complete sense to them. But then there are other people who use that term derisively. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right. Some people are so passionate that they can't see past that passion for whatever it is they're talking about.
Yeah, but I really think a lot of the hate comes because of the people and who they were and what they became, and less about, well, Sgt. Pepper's is a terrible song. You don't hear people saying songs are bad by the band.
Mm-hmm.
It's more about the band is bad.
Yeah, if you look at
the band is somebody they don't like.
Yeah. If you look at the Grammys this year, the Beatles won a Grammy and the Rolling Stones won a Grammy. And there were people up in arms about that. You have to admit whether or not you like that new Beatles song, it's pretty cool that they are able to do that 50,
Oh, yeah.
60 years after the fact. The Stones are a totally different story. I mean, the Stones did have a long period where they didn't do anything, but they've basically been touring since Steel Wheels in 1989.
Yeah.
Almost not nonstop. There are years in between albums, but they've been touring a lot. And that speaks to a lot of things. That speaks to their dedication to the band and what they're doing. I think it also speaks to how important it is for bands nowadays to play live, because they're not making the money that they used to make from the records.
Yeah, I think a band like the Rolling Stones, because let's face it, they have oodles of money, but they're doing it because they don't know what else to do.
Yeah, and because I'm sure they love it.
Yeah, I mean, they love it, but when you're, they're just not ready to hang it up.
No.
At 80, I will be ready to hang it up.
Yeah, I'm already ready to hang it
Yeah.
up. You think back to another historic band, Led Zeppelin, which Physical Graffiti just turned 50 a couple days ago, if you can believe that or not.
Yeah, I think you sent me
Isn't that crazy?
either you sent me a message or I read it somewhere. Yeah.
See, they were a band that was together from like 68 to 1980 when John Bonham died. And when he died, they were like, that's it. Now, they have done a couple reunion shows, and Page and Plant got back together and recorded a couple albums together. But basically, after that Celebration Day show, I think that was in 2003, maybe, or 4, or maybe it was later than that. Anyway, they came back together, did that show, and Robert Plant said that's it. And they haven't toured on that nostalgia thing because of his decision. Now, if it was up to Jimmy Page, they probably would have been touring kind of like the Rolling Stones. But it just goes to show that these things are very subjective to the artists. And, whatever they, I don't think anybody that's involved with Led Zeppelin needs the money, right?
Right.
I don't think anybody involved with the Rolling Stones needs the money. I think the Stones do it because they love it, and they love the attention. And on the other side of that, there's groups like Led Zeppelin that is not doing it because they want to maintain the band as it was originally, and they can't do that if one of them isn't here. So they're two sides of different coins.
Yeah.
Do you think that if John Lennon hadn't died, that the Beatles would have gotten back together?
No.
No.
I really don't, because it had been, it was basically about 10 years, and it didn't appear like any of them had any inkling of all 4 of them getting together.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 of them, but never 4.
Yeah. I don't know, man. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah, it's an interesting proposition for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's a good example. I will go on record. I love the Beatles. Always have, always will.
They were certainly more than a couple of my Columbia House purchases.
I'd like to see those order forms. It's too bad you don't have them.
I may have one.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
The next one I want to talk about is a more contemporary band, and it's a little band called Metallica, who arguably is the biggest band in the world. Right now, they're out on a tour for 72 Seasons, which is their most recent record. It's a pretty good record, kind of a return to form for them. And they are playing 2 shows in each city with a different opening band each night and completely different sets each night.
Wow.
So how cool is that?
Yeah, that makes you want to go to the show even if you're a casual fan of the band.
Yeah. And, it's expensive, and most people probably can't afford, they're going to go with somebody most of the time. So
yeah.
For 2 tickets to each show, that's pretty spendy. It's an interesting approach. But this is another example of a band who has been probably since Load came out, I think in 1996, this band has been very divisive too.
Yeah.
Their leader was Cliff Burton. He was their bassist. He's the one that passed away on tour in Europe in 1986. And he was replaced by Jason Newsted. And that's, I think, where the beginning of the divisiveness of Metallica started, because a lot of people were so vehemently attached to Cliff, since he was kind of like the musical linchpin of the band. And a lot of people were not accepting of anybody replacing him, regardless of who that person was. So they then put out an EP called Garage Days, which people loved, and it was basically them re-recording songs from bands that were instrumental to them, like Budgie and the Misfits, and that was probably an ingenious thing for them to do, because it kind of endeared people back to the band and kind of drew them into the band. And then their first full-length record after that was this one, And Justice for All, which is a pretty kind of a polarizing album within Metallica, because it's, a lot of people consider it their prog album, where the songs are very long, and there's a lot of things that are divisive about this group. But this was a hit. This had the song One on it, which they did their first video for, became an MTV phenomenon, sold millions and millions of albums. The tour for this was hugely successful. Part of it was the Monsters of Rock tour, where you had Van Halen, Metallica, Dokken, Scorpions, I can't remember who the Kingdom Come, I think, was one of the bands. But what really started the divisiveness for Metallica people was the Black Album.
The Black Album.
In 91.
Which I really like.
It's great. I mean, Bob Rock produced that record, and I'm pretty sure that the reason that Lars wanted him to produce it is because of the way that Dr. Feelgood sounded, because Bob Rock produced Dr. Feelgood for Motley Crue, and the way he makes the drums sound on anything that he does. So Enter Sandman gets released, and it's everywhere, all over MTV, all over the radio. That's, I think, where the divisiveness with Metallica really started. And then, what was the record after the Black Album? I think it was Load.
It may have been. I don't know the catalog nearly as well as you do.
But then Load comes along, and they all kind of cut their hair. They all kind of put some makeup on, and the music changes a little bit. It's not necessarily thrash anymore. I mean, that's the one thing. This band is a thrash band. These guys began as a thrash band, and they're one of the big four. And suddenly, between the Black Album and Load, their sound softens a little bit, and it evolves a little bit, and it changes. And people that are passionate about groups like this don't deal well with change.
No. Well, and I mean, that's with a lot of these bands we've talked about, that is kind of a throughput.
Yeah.
I mean, it's maybe 50-50. Whenever a band changes, it turns the fans away.
Yeah. And it brings others in.
Yeah.
It's kind of give a little, take a little.
Yeah, it just becomes a bigger pool.
Then, they did Load, they did Reload, and then the really, really divisive. There have been a lot of, I didn't really even think about it, but there have been a lot of really divisive albums for Metallica when you really dig into it. Saint Anger comes out, and this is around the time when Lars and the band are speaking out against Napster and digital file sharing, and he's all totally against all of that. and doesn't make a lot of friends talking about that. And I was kind of like, why is he, so angry about? I've come around the other way. I really feel like the reason that the music industry is what it is and the bands can't make the money that they used to from albums is because of the digital.
Yeah. If they would just embrace Napster some way,
I don't know.
It may have been okay.
It might have. It might
then
not have.
Apple would maybe not blown up.
Yeah. But Saint Anger, a lot of people hated the way that the album sounded. Not necessarily the songs, but the way the album sounded, because the drums sounded like he was playing, on soup cans, and it wasn't a pleasing album to listen to, at least not to my ears. I remember I was working in Louisville on Trading Spaces. I worked on a bunch of those down there, and that album got released when I was working down there. Went to a record store, got it, threw it in my CD player in my car, and I was like, what the hell am I listening to?
What is wrong with this?
And so that was kind of a nail in the coffin for the band. Then, they did some kind of monster documentary about the stuff that each of the band members were going through, and that kind of turned people off. But at the same time, it's pretty amazing for a band at that level to share that much about the internal workings of the band. Then another divisive album that they had was called Lulu, and it was the album they did with Lou Reed, which, gets a lot of hatred.
Yeah. Well, and Lou Reed's another one of those artists that gets a lot of hatred too.
Right. I mean, he's definitely a divisive guy.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a person that, marched to the beat of his own drum.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy. So Metallica, they've when you really think about it, they are a very divisive group, but they've kind of turned the corner from that, and they are definitely one of the top bands touring and making music in today's industry. So, we can take a look at the back of the album here.
There they are with the long hair. Nice.
One of my favorite songs on this is Blackened, though. It starts out with Blackened. It's such a great song. And here they are looking pensive and angry.
Nice.
What's your next? Is this your last one?
Yes, it is.
All right.
The Ramones.
Yeah.
And the Ramones are kind of the poster child for all the different punk bands. Because I've talked about the Sex Pistols so much. They're another one. Green Day. I mean, there are tons of punk bands that are just hated by everybody else. And that's the way they want it.
Yeah. I feel like these groups, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like these groups kind of egged those head-to-head battles between bands on. Like they wanted you to be fans of them, and they wanted you to hate other bands.
Well, yeah, that was kind of it was like the weird inbred ethos for punks.
Yeah. Yeah.
You love what you love, but you hate the establishment.
Yeah. Yeah. The Ramones kind of, I think the Ramones benefited from the time. I mean, it was the right place, the right time for the band like this, right? Because CBGB in New York was kind of a springboard for so many different bands, right? You had bands like Talking Heads at the time and Television, which were kind of the new wave and early post-punk bands. And then you had these guys that are literally playing 2-minute songs with 3 chords, and people just latched on to the Ramones and have never let go.
Well, and the funny thing is they were never that popular.
Yeah.
I mean, they're popular with underground, and certainly it's not hard to find somebody wearing a Ramones t-shirt who
doesn't know anything about the band.
Doesn't know anything about the band. It's a little bit like the Misfits, where the logo and everything has taken off more than the band.
Yeah.
I mean, just who they were. And I think more people than not have probably heard a Ramones song, but there are probably a lot of people who've heard Ramones songs that don't
Know anything.
don't know anything about the band, or don't own any of the music, or don't have a plan to own any of the music.
Yeah. I remember the first time I saw Vacation, and Blitzkrieg Bop is like in the beginning of when they just hit the road. And that was impressive to me. I mean, I didn't necessarily, I think that was like 1982 or 3. I mean, I wasn't really aware of who they were or their story, but I knew that song sure was catchy and was in a mainstream movie. You know, that's a big deal.
Yeah, and a lot of people will say, a lot of the Ramone detractors are like, "Oh, they're so overrated." they did the same thing for, all 14 albums.
Yeah.
Well, it was working pretty well for them.
Yeah, I mean, there's another band that's done the same thing for all of their albums, and they're called AC/DC, and again, they're one of the biggest bands in the world.
The Ramones started in 74, so all that, I think the whole punk movement was happening at the same time everywhere.
Yeah.
It just was mainly New York and
London. Yeah, I would have killed to be in New York City at the time.
Oh, yeah.
To be able to just go there to CBGB and see these dudes and all of the bands that came through there, but also be able to go to the Village and see, the jazz artists that were.
There was so much going on. The Ramones are a little bit like Kiss. They had a look, and every one of the band members had the same name.
Yeah.
They were all, Johnny, Dee, Joey.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was a gimmick in that way that helped them take off. Without the gimmick, would the band take off? Nobody knows.
I don't think, looking back on it now, at the time, I'm sure people derided it as a gimmick, but having the same last name is just ingenious. It really is. And to me, what it does is it makes it seem like a family.
Yeah.
It makes it seem like a cohesive unit, which then the punk ethos is like us against you.
Yeah.
And if we all have the same name and we're all dressed the same, we're gonna roll over you and conquer you. That's kind of what
That's pretty much it. But I mean, even the hair,
yeah.
It was the same look.
Yeah.
And all that's based on the Beatles.
Yeah, for sure. No, they're a very divisive band, but they are also one of those bands that I think has become more beloved since the end of the band than they ever were when they were a band. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that that's because in retrospect you can give more thought and kind of look back more objectively about their career and what they had to add to the zeitgeist.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who say the Ramones ruined punk. I think with all these bands, whenever they get more popular than the rest in a particular music style or genre, you're automatically going to be ridiculed by the rest.
Right. Oh, for sure. I think you're right. Success breeds a lot of things, but one of the biggest things that it breeds is jealousy.
Yes.
And then, then the knives are out.
Yes.
At that point. Well, that's a great example, man. And I've always loved this black and white kind of gritty color with the bright pink name on it.
Super cool.
It is super cool.
You're up. What do you got?
Frank Zappa may be the best example of the most divisive artist ever. And we don't need to belabor it because I feel like I talk about Zappa enough. But
you like him.
I do. I like everything about him. I mean, I look at this cover. This would be. I mean, he's got grease all over his face. Joe's Garage. This is probably a pretty polarizing album cover in our politically correct world that we live in today. Zappa was one of those guys. First off, was absolutely a musical genius. I mean, he could notate music. He loved doo-wop and music from the 50s. And when you listen to any of his stuff, you can hear that doo-wop and that 50s influence. He had, much like Steely Dan, had the best musicians in the world playing for him. Had, marimba and xylophone in his music. His bands were practiced to the point of perfection. He ran his live band much like Prince ran his. I mean, it was like you had to be on, and if you weren't, you heard about it. Miles Davis is another one that ran his bands that way too. A lot of people think that that's a tyrannical way to run a musical outfit, but when you list all of those artists out who were musicians to that level, who did run their bands like that, you can't argue with the success of those artists.
No.
He was a provocateur. He loved pissing people off. He loved the fact that his music challenged people. And that's what drove him.
And that's where a lot of the hate comes from, because he was an aggressor.
Yeah. I mean, he wasn't afraid to share his opinion.
No.
He wasn't afraid to share his music. There's a complexity to his music that on the jazz tip is probably one of the things that pushed people away. But I listened to it, and if you listen to it objectively, it really isn't that weird. It's just not something that you hear in a lot of other popular music.
It's just very, very different.
It's very different than anything. Honestly, I don't know of an artist whose art is that strange or seemingly unapproachable, And I've talked about it being someone who grew up as a musician. When I first was introduced to Zappa, it was in high school. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and it was this album. When I heard it, I heard all of the musical complexity, all of the instrumentation, the weird vocals, because he would do vocals and then he'd have other folks do vocals, and one of the main voices throughout this is the central scrutinizer, and it's him, and he's doing this voice, and I mean, it seems highbrow, right, which is not necessarily approachable, but when I first heard it, I was so intrigued. I'm like, what is going on with this? And this would have been, in the late 80s, early 90s. And he, of course, I think he passed away in 93 or 94. But it was just something that as soon as I heard this, I'm like, man, I need to hear more of what this guy does. And, that's why I love Zappa. Now, there are a lot of people who it seems half and half again. Half the people you talk to hate him, half the people you talk to love him. His work has been influential in both rock and classical music, but his unique style means he doesn't fit neatly into either of those categories. So you're talking about a guy who also recorded classical music, also recorded, his music, rock, pop, whatever you want to call it. And I think challenging artists like this push people into places that they normally wouldn't go with their fandom of music. And I think that his legacy is that he, I just wish he had lived longer, because I think the world needs people like this who are challenging, maybe to open doors for people that wouldn't be opened otherwise. Zappa, here's I love this picture on the back of whoever the makeup artist is getting
That's
the
nice.
grease all over his face. But, his son, Dweezil, tours and plays Frank's music, and he's an amazing guitarist and if his dad wasn't the person that he was, I think Dweezil would be a superstar. He has taken that torch of his dad's legacy and carried it. So if you ever get a chance and you want to see some amazing musicians and an amazing musician in Dweezil himself, go to one of his shows. What do you think about Zappa?
I'm lukewarm. One of the first albums I ever owned was a hand-me-down,
Yeah.
The Mothers,
Yeah.
the band from East LA.
Yeah.
I think is the title, but there was a song on one whole side of the album is Billy the Mountain.
Yeah.
And I listened to that over and over and over.
That's so funny, because it doesn't necessarily beg repeated listens.
No, it's very much a long story about Billy the Mountain.
Our love of music comes from very different sides, and I think that that's what makes the show work.
Yeah.
We would love for you guys to share your favorite divisive artists and let us know what you think about the ones we talked about here today on the show. We also want you to go to our YouTube channel. We want you to check out all of the stuff that's on there. We'd love you to check out our social media and communicate with us. That's where you can really go back and forth with us too. We want you to check out that link to our merch page, because you can get one of these beautiful Vinyl Ventures mugs at the merch store right now. What else do we want people to do when they go to those places? John.
Like, subscribe, and share.
And comment.
But
what was your dad joke thing?
If it's your vibe, subscribe.
I think that's going to be a catchphrase that takes off. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes, it has.
Usually we talk about albums, and usually I have a blast doing that, but it's been fun digging a little deeper into these artists and the reasons, why people love and hate them.
Yep.
We just want to encourage you guys to, have that special relationship with your music. Doing this show has really driven home to me how important it is. Every time I have to go through and dig records out for one of these shows, I feel a special feeling and a special relationship with my music, and I thank you for that too. We want to thank Jacob Hansen and Keith Toombs too. We couldn't do this show without them, and we want you guys to keep tuning in, keep going back, checking out those old episodes, and give us a little help in what you'd like us to talk about on the next one. For Wheels, for Frank, I'm Jay, and we'll see you all the next time around.